Good morning. Good morning. Good to see everyone. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Cleveland Host. And this morning, talking about spiritual experiences reminds me of a few years ago when I had an opportunity as part of a business trip to go to Denmark. Now, a lot of us know from history and math that anyone with significant amounts of European ancestry is going to be descended from at least a few Vikings among our millions of ancestors that we have going back that far. So I was especially excited because I wanted to see some of these ancient sites associated with the Vikings that are among all of our ancestors. And being that I was traveling alone, I was away from my family, and it happened to be Beltane weekend. So I was also looking for a place to do the Beltane ritual, thinking of my family so many thousands of miles away. And I thought, perfect, I'll find a stone circle because there's, if anyone's familiar with this, there's hundreds of them all around Europe. So I talked to some people and I made a crude map that showed some of these sites, and I visited a burial mound, a bunch of other ones. And during the course of these, I noticed that I had missed a site, and that just by happenstance, my path to the next route was going to take me right by it on the road. So I figured, all right, good. I parked the car there, and I looked at where it was, and I figured, looks like it's out in the middle of the woods. So I walked out into the woods, using the sun for direction, no path, and I'm walking out there, and I see, all of a sudden, up ahead a little bit on the hill, this stone circle. Looked really nice. I'm like, wow, that's great. And because it was uphill a little ways, you couldn't really see inside the stone circle from where I was. So I walked up, and I walked into the stone circle, and in the middle was this small grave, stone-lined grave. And I thought, and it was small enough that it made me think it was probably for a child. And my first thought was, this one won't work. Because I was looking for a circle for a Beltane ritual, associated with life, and this obviously had a reminder of death right in the middle. And I stood there and I looked in the grave. Couldn't see any bones or anything. I mean, this thing's thousands of years old. And the strangest feeling came over me. I imagined the community that used this stone circle so many thousands of years ago. I imagined the families involved. I pictured them in my mind, and I thought, how long ago must that have been? That over the many years that this was used, and I thought about going back, how far back I'd have to go in time. I thought, it's spring now, going back to winter, fall, summer, spring, winter, fall, spring, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer. And that cycle, that repeating cycle became a sound. I heard this hum, this rising hum, as I went faster and faster back in time. Winter, summer, and it goes up. And I could almost see in my mind all these hundreds of people. And I imagined their lives. I imagined all these different lives. And as this feeling overcame me, I realized that I was feeling sharp stones against my back. And I thought, this is what it was like. This is what their lives were like. They had some areas were comfortable or sharper. And because some areas were more or less comfortable, I was thinking that's what those lives were like. Some times were comfortable, some were hard. There were disappointments, there were wonderful successes, there were dramas, there were children, there were fathers and mothers, there were all these people in this community. I felt the life, the energy of all those people in me, and streaming down my arms and out my own stretched hands out my fingertips into the ground and then up into the trees above me. It was, as I mentioned, it was a Beltane time, and the trees, they were all filled with buds that were just ready to burst. And this energy went up into the trees, and I heard the birds singing louder and louder and louder. And the wind built up with this crescendo of sound, and the trees shook, and I just laid there, and then suddenly stopped. And as I laid there, I felt so enmeshed, so connected. I just laid there for I don't know how long. I laid there for a while. And after a while, the feeling passed. And I opened my eyes and got up, and you can imagine I'm kind of like, oh, what was that, right? So I thought, I got to write this down. So I grabbed the notebook I had for the ritual anyway, and I sat on a stone. I wrote down some details. And I realized that I didn't remember what the grave looked like. And I thought I was looking right at it. So I got up and I looked at it. It just looked like a regular, nondescript, Neolithic stone structure. I thought, okay. And I couldn't remember other details or other things. Just didn't make any sense at all. I noticed that my ears were wet. My ears were wet? Why are my ears all wet? Well, they're wet from tears coming from the side of my face, from my eyes down to the side. And I couldn't figure out how I'd gotten onto the ground. Didn't remember that detail either. I mean, if I collapsed, you'd think I might have, bumped my head or something, or I don't know, felt something. Or if I had decided, oh, maybe I'll go over here, I would have remembered that. I think that some corner of my mind probably held on to a bit of sanity the whole time. I don't know. And the sound, what's going on with that sound? Where could that have come from? So, I look at that and I think, what am I going to do with that? And I read some of these other experiences. You can find them online all over the place. We heard 3 of them already. And I think, what are we going to do with that? What do we do with these experiences? I mean, we can take them at face value. They're obviously powerful and strong experiences. And so what happens if we do that? What happens if we take these, just as they are? Well, we find out right away that, from the reading earlier that Krishna is the Lord of the universe. And then we also found out that Allah was the one true God, and that the Catholic Church is the one true faith. So hold on a second, that doesn't make any sense, right? Those contradict each other. There's lots of these. Another one that's very well known is Joseph Smith getting the plates from the angel, where Jesus actually talks to him and tells him that the Mormon Church is the one true faith. So we got a problem here, right? These can't all be true because they contradict each other. So we say, okay, what are we going to do with those? The good news is that as Unitarian Universalists, we have a very clear way to approach those. Because our 4th principle guarantees us, it encourages us to go on a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And looking at this, I realized what a wonderful instruction that is. Look in that very compact phrase what we have. We have a free search. Wow! What church tells you to go find out about other churches? Come on, right? They don't do that. It's completely free. We are instructed to go and check out everything. And it's also responsible. That means we use evidence, reason, and compassion to think about all these things. Think about what makes sense. Think about what might help bring about a just, healthy, and sustainable world. Think about what brings about a nice community. And, we unfortunately have heard the words for what people call a free search. It's called heresy or blasphemy or something like that by people who don't want that. But no, we're given a free search. And responsible. Unfortunately, we don't have to imagine what can go wrong if the search is not responsible. Spiritual searches that are not responsible can be very, very harmful. Every year, I don't know how many children die because their parents are led by a spiritual search to give them faith healing or avoid medical care. Just a couple months ago, we saw Ammon Bundy. If you hadn't read it, and the news media just happened not to cover this aspect very much, for clear reasons, Ammon Bundy prayed all night, and Jesus told him what to do. He believed he was told by Jesus to form an armed militia and take over the federal wildlife refuge. And we're really quite lucky that it was handled well enough that only one person died. Osama bin Laden knew that Mohammed wanted him to attack America, leading to the September 11th attacks. And of course, there's more and more stories like this all the way throughout history. Kamikazes and so on all often have a spiritual component. Now, I know what some people might think. Some people might think, those aren't real spiritual experiences. Those aren't true and good spiritual experiences because they don't match my ideology. True and real spiritual experiences match my ideology, and the ones that don't are false. Right? I mean, come on, that's a no true Scotsman. If we are going to accept spiritual experiences, then hopefully we can avoid being hypocrites about it. Okay, so that means that we can actually look at these responsibly. And when we do, we find out a lot of really cool things. One thing we find out is that spiritual experiences have a tendency to almost always match the culture and the spirituality of the person having them. It's not a coincidence that there's a lot of spiritual experiences with Jesus in the United States and not very many with Krishna. I am sure that many people here are not that surprised that my spiritual experiences had to do with ancestors. This is especially true if we look at near-death experiences. Near-death experiences are really interesting, and they've been studied a lot. Near-death experiences will often include an out-of-body experience. An out-of-body experience where the person feels their consciousness is up by the ceiling, looking down at everything that's going on with the doctors and surgery or whatever's going on. And the first big study took a look at 1,500 surgeries, and it placed a card with information, maybe a number or image or something like that, about 3-4 feet down from the ceiling facing upwards so that the patient couldn't see it. But if the patient's consciousness was up here, they'd be able to see it. And out of hundreds of experiences that these people experienced, nobody could say what was on the card. And in fact, they're doing this one again. And there's been plenty of other investigations into that too. We also find out some of the conditions that make these more likely. Conditions of, say, exhaustion or sleep deprivation or sensory deprivation or overload. All of these can make them more likely, along with chanting or saying repetitive prayers over and over, or a lot of spiritual technologies involving maybe prayer beads or something like that. I've got my Kasmala right here, a lot of you are familiar with it, having my ancestors marked on here all the way back to the Big Bang. In fact, a lot of methods can be done with biofeedback or other ones that bring about these experiences. You can actually go to a training institute, like the Monroe Institute is one, to get trained in these techniques and be able to go on a spiritual experience at will. And of course, the easiest way, we know the easiest way because we know a lot about how the brain works chemically with neurotransmitters and things like that. And the easiest way is chemically. Chemically with various drugs, maybe ketamine or LSD or many others. And right now, there is a study going on in Johns Hopkins where they're recruiting spiritual leaders, rabbis, priests, imams, to take drugs like this and describe their experiences. And we'll be able to compare some of the experiences, not just from anybody, but from spiritual leaders who live and breathe their spirituality in their jobs. We also know they can be caused by direct stimulation of the brain, especially the temporal parietal lobe or many other places. But don't think things are oversimplified. Anything with the brain is going to be complicated. Some of these include people talking with their God. And we really can't forget another important aspect to these. Another important aspect to these is that human beings not only hallucinate, not just under those conditions, but in their day-to-day lives. Many of us have seen or heard things that aren't real. I know I have. But they also fabricate memories. Our brains fabricate memories and hide the evidence. It's not like this is some, devious plot that someone has to fabricate a memory. A lot of us are familiar. How many people are familiar with the study with Bugs Bunny and Disneyland? Right? The Bugs Bunny Disneyland story. They were able to very easily, with just a couple of words, and then proper amounts of time and other things like that, cause people to fabricate memories of meeting, hugging, interacting with, talking with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. There's no Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. He's a Warner Brothers character. And there's been 100 other studies like this. They're easy to look up. They're really quite shocking. Getting people to think they went on a hot air balloon ride and 100 other things like that. So I look at my own experience. Were the birds really controlled? Did the weather actually get affected? Maybe that was just a coincidence. Or maybe my strong and clear memory of that doesn't mean that it actually happened. I don't know. It's tempting to think of memories as video recorders. Our memories are not video recorders. Our memories are like historical sagas, embellished, written, and often with a bias, depending on the circumstances. So, as you use, what do we do with all that? It's a lot of information. There's a lot more, too, that I don't have time to get into. We, of course, each can draw our own conclusions based on all the information we have, responsibly. And thinking about this, I realized what a critical balance this was. A critical balance for each of us, but especially a critical balance for Unitarian Universalism as a whole, for the future of UU. On one hand, if we don't talk about these, then that can make some people more comfortable because they won't hear about a spiritual experience that doesn't fit their own personal beliefs. They might say, "Oh no, we don't want to, discuss these because someone might feel, not completely welcomed when they hear a spiritual experience from a different set of spiritual beliefs." The worst thing that kind of approach could do would be, first, to stifle our own spiritual growth by limiting us from learning all these experiences. And another broader impact is it can drive away the thousands of people who are looking for a spiritual home. These thousands of people, many of them religious nuns or millennials, are looking for a spiritual home, and they're not looking for a place they can gather with the committee to wordsmith a document. They're looking for a place where they can feel a spiritual community. There's the other extreme. What if we go to the other extreme? If we go to the other extreme and say, all spiritual experiences are accepted without discussion, and everyone brings them. If that happens, we've seen before that some of them aren't necessarily good. Some of them aren't necessarily healthy, and we certainly don't know that all of them are necessarily true to the letter. If we do that, then we fall into the position, or maybe non-position, of saying that all beliefs are equally true. All ideas are equally right, and we become a religion of nothing. A religion of nothing where we can't even voice our discussions about any of these topics for fear of offending someone, because they'll say, "Oh, no, somebody said, you know, what about this with this experience I had? If that happens, then we can't talk. And if we can't discuss things and talk with people, then you can't get to know people. You can't even have a community. You can't even have a community. You sure can't have a spiritual community. There's a balance there. And a lot of that balance comes down to when it's appropriate to talk about these things. Let me give you an example. As a pagan, and as a naturalistic pagan, I'm sort of in a closet, inside another closet, right? Because not only is paganism, you know, sort of closeted in our society, but among the pagans, most of us have a lot of very supernatural beliefs that I don't think anything supernatural is, you know, I don't think any of that's real. So in that kind of situation, I have to look at my own personal belief in the context of the wider community. So if I go out in the woods, say, with a pagan friend, and we're going to find a nice place, an appropriate place for our ritual, then we might be walking around and we might find an outcropping, and he might say, oh, this rock outcropping speaks to me to say to have the ritual here. And I look around and I'm like, looks like a great place, let's do it. And when we have our ritual and we build that energy, that very powerful energy that we can feel, if some of those pagans, most of them probably, depending on what group I'm with, see that energy as supernatural, cosmic energy coming down, and I myself see that as the mental human energy of our community, that's great, that's fine. Because the details of that's not what this is about. This is about a community ritual where people are feeling that spirituality. And later in the potluck, we might have a good discussion about this. And we often do, and that's good because one nice thing about the pagan community is nobody thinks anyone's going to hell with the wrong beliefs. So that helps a lot. Or on the other hand, if someone tells me that they've been spiritually led to fight against the threat of gay marriage, I think, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because we remember that our search is free and responsible. So, what I'm trying to say is that our Unitarian Universalist first source is the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. What a wonderful thing. I'm so glad to have that listed explicitly right in our sources and listed first. Wow. What a wonderful source. And as Unitarian Universalists, we have roots with this going back all the way through the Transcendentalists to the 1800s and even back before that. These spiritual experiences range from just the enjoyment of watching the sunrise, spending time together, or all the way up to the powerful spiritual experiences that we've been discussing. Like our second, fifth, and sixth sources, they cut across nationalities, across cultures, uniting our whole human family, stretching back millennia. And they remind us that people are not stupid. They believe things for reasons. And when someone's beliefs are different from yours, it's an interesting discussion to find out why, how. And you're not going to find out a lot if you don't discuss things with people you don't agree with. They can be as close as a walk in the woods or the night sky, a meditation or a night with family or friends. These spiritual experiences are such a beautiful thread in the tapestry of our human existence. Thank you, and blessed be.